you know the problem. You want to start learning Japanese with video games, but you didn't know where to start, how to choose them, where to get them, and how to actually learn Japanese with games. In that case, I hope this 3-parted guide will help you give an answer to all those questions. Let's start with which games should you learn Japanese. I consider this to be a living ranking, meaning I can only say what I know and which games I've played so far. So this video might possibly be updated in the future. And of course I don't know all Japanese games, if that was even possible. Most of the games are on the Switch or Vita, and I try to include mostly games that are suited for beginners and upper beginners or maybe lower intermediate learners. And I know that Resting Peach Face, find her channel in the description, is also planning on doing a video like this, so definitely check out. The first game I want to recommend is called Ephemeral Fantasy on Dark. It's both on the Switch and the Vita, but I definitely recommend buying it for the Switch because of one very unique feature that got me into playing Otome games in Japanese, because you can switch between the languages, English or Japanese, anytime. Just go to the options and it takes 5 to 10 seconds and poof, you have an English or Japanese game. So whenever you don't understand a sentence, you can just switch the language option and there you have your perfect translation. It's really handy, and that's why I think it's suited for upper beginners already, because you can always check whether you translated it correctly. The other reason why I think it's suited for beginners is that it's in a fantasy school setting, so you have much of day-to-day school talk and only some fantasy vocabulary that isn't too complicated, I would say. Another convenient feature about this game is that it has very short chapters. You have a prologue, I don't know, like an hour or even shorter, depending on your reading speed, and then every of the 4 characters has 20 chapters. And for me as a learner, they took me about half an hour to an hour each to read. And the reason why I liked this concept was that I had a clear target for which I was reading to complete the chapter, and most of the chapters came with a sweet CG. The second game I'd recommend is Yunohana Spring. It's also available on the Vita or the Switch, but the Switch has a complete version, whereas the Vita has the main game and the fan disc and separate games. It's a very light-hearted romance, a very fluffy romance, with a lot of day-to-day talk and only some more complicated ryokan vocabulary because you work in a traditional Japanese inn. But overall I would say it isn't too complicated though. Third, I'd recommend a much lesser known title. It's called Walpurga no Uta, or Walpurga's Poetry, or in German Walpurgas Gedicht. It's an indie game for the Vita, and the reason why I recommend it is because it uses very, very few kanji. Most of the words are written in katakana or hiragana, and it's also a fantasy school setting, so you have much of school talk, but the fantasy talk is a bit more complicated, and that can be a little more challenging. The story evolves around this vampire who is kind of hunting for the main character and werewolves who protect her, and then you can choose who you want to be with, the wolves or the vampire. So it's a little darker in tone. As you see, it's rated C, so it's a bit more spicy, but nothing too much. Next, I would recommend Hakuouki Sweet School Life. It's a spin-off of the well-known Hakuouki series, but set in modern school life. Again, you only have very easy school talk, and the use of kanji is rather moderate. Problems with this game concerning the language is you have mini-games for each chapter, and 2 of them are language-based. For one mini-game you have the choice to fail it and it doesn't matter, but for the last mini-game it matters that you succeed in this game. So that can be really hard for beginners. But there are many resources on the internet who guide you through those mini-games, and there's even a really solid fan translation I can link in the description. Concerning the story, you're a girl on a generally all-boys high school. The whole school is in love with the main character for no apparent reason, and it feels a bit like a harem game that's really made for fans of the series. But I put it on the list because if you're a fan of the Hakuouki series and are thinking about playing one of those games, I wouldn't advise you to play the historical ones, but maybe choose the school life setting, that would be more easy to read. Number 5 is also based in a historical setting. It's called Shinobi Koi. And it's also available on the Switch in the full version, including all ports and fan disc, or the beta version where you have to buy everything separately. What is Shinobi Koi about? You're a girl who once again comes to an all-boys school because she seems to be a very talented ninja. And that's why she has the chance to date all those other students. Normally I wouldn't include historical settings because they are generally really hard to read. But I feel that this one, as it's more a rom-com and based on the characters and their relations, less on a tragic plot, it's still relatively easy to read for an historical setting. You have to learn some specific vocabulary like ninja or shinobi, but the longer you play the game, the more used you'll get to this vocabulary. And another feature of the game is like a dictionary function, so they explain difficult or unusual historical words, so that's really convenient, and that's why I included it still on the list, though it's historical fiction. I wasn't too sure whether I should include number 6, Clap, Kind, Love and Punish. It's not only a weird title, it's also a weird game because you're a teacher at a yokai school and you need to spank your students in order for them not to become rampage and transform into their uncontrollable yokai form. But still, it's in a school setting, so again you have much day-to-day talk, but you have also very complicated fantasy concepts. So I would only recommend it if you're like an intermediate learner. But other than that, it doesn't really have a strong plot you need to understand, you just need to romance your favorite characters and spank them in a rhythm game. For the next part I want to include games I haven't played myself, but I have heard that they shouldn't be too hard to read. The first place goes to Kenkabancho Otome. It's a game where you are dressed as a boy to attend a boys' school, though you are a girl, and need to fight your way through. You can find a Let's Play on Resting Peach Face channel, and the great thing about her Let's Play is that the first parts include both the Japanese original text and her English translation, so you can read both and compare your own translation to hers. It's really great. Next, Burial Barricade. It's going to be localized soon and is also on the Switch. You can again check your translation with the original localized translation. Same goes for Cupid Parasite. That will also be localized soon. Both Variable Barricade and Cupid Parasite are in a more slice of life setting, so it should be fairly easy to read. Unlocalized games, but that are still in the school setting or don't use kanji too much, are Amnesia, Diabolic Lovers, Dance with Devils, Rock Zero, or Lover Pretend. Until now you have heard some examples of Otome games that could be suited for beginners or intermediate learners, and now I want to give some general rules you could pay attention to when you're purchasing or looking for Otome games yourself. First, the do's. As I already said, school setting is always a safe choice because you have day-to-day vocabulary, not too many unknown, uncommon concepts. Same goes for slice of life and rom-com Otome games. And another thing to pay attention to is available fan translation. If a game has a fan translation, you can choose a more complicated game because you always back it up with the fan translation. If you don't understand a specific sentence or the whole game, it wouldn't be a total waste of money and time. Another feature you can look out for is the language switching feature. As far as I know, sadly, most Otome games come only in one language, but I know of Ephemeral and from the same developer Steam Prison. But the problem with Steam Prison for me was that it's too complicated, so I wouldn't recommend it for beginners. And the other I know is Nightshade, and that's historical fiction, but if you're an intermediate, upper intermediate learner, you could definitely go for this and always have the option to check your translation. If you want to find out more about your chosen games, you can just type in the Romanji name of the game plus review, because there are a few bloggers who post about Japanese only game in English. The other option is of course type the Japanese title plus review and Google Translate the site. The third thing you can do is watch the promotional material on the developer's website, either YouTube or their official games website. I also like to look up the games on Japanese Amazon and then Google Translate all the reviews. There's a button that does this automatically for you. To the avoids. First, avoid historical fiction. I already mentioned it before. You won't understand a word, so don't do it. Because it's extremely difficult to read. Obviously, they use words you don't hear in daily life, you don't hear in your Genki books or any other beginners, intermediate, blindness books like archery or dethronement. Chances are you won't need these words in your beginner's vocabulary. Similar, I would say, goes for high fantasy settings, because not only do you need to understand the language, you only need to understand the fictional setting. You could also watch out for games with time choices mechanics that can raise the difficulty, like Render Flow or the newly released Buster Fellows. And the other thing to pay attention to is fan discs. I didn't know when I first bought my games that fan discs are a thing. So pay attention to the subtitles of the game. Google and look up the whole name of the game. Big tip from a person who wasted a bit of money. That's it for today. I hope I could give you some inspiration on which games to look into or what you should pay attention to. Next week we'll talk about how to buy them. I hope you're looking forward to it, and see you then. Bye!